We are recording this session, so it will appear on our YouTube channel this afternoon. So if you want to go back and review any of the points, please feel free to do so. I'm not expecting any fire alarms to go off, but if you do, you'll end up just seeing a blank screen. I won't be here, but you can stay where you are. So, moving on. A quick disclaimer, just so that we can cover ourselves, which is basically the following presentation is produced for general guidance only, and professional advice should always be sought before any transaction is undertaken. Individual circumstances can vary, and therefore no responsibility can be accepted by Harts Limited or any of their affiliates for any action taken or any decision made to refrain from action by attendees of this presentation. Okay. So what we want to cover this morning, and it will be a relatively short webinar, is updates to the furlough scheme, updates to the self-employed scheme, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. So the furlough scheme, you have to consider this as furlough scheme number 2 or version 2, much the same as a self-employed scheme. They are two totally separate schemes. So up to the 30th of June 2020, so at the end of this month, there are no changes. So you can continue to carry on claiming for furlough as you have been, and you will get 80% back. There won't be any cost to you, and so on. From 1st of July is when furlough scheme version 2 starts, and you can bring back part-timers and claim coronavirus job retention scheme for normal hours not worked. We'll go into that in a little bit of detail a little bit later. The scheme closes to new entrants and employees on the 30th of June. So what we mean by that is it's not just employees, it's employers as well. So if you haven't used the coronavirus job retention scheme by the end of June, then you won't be able to access the furlough scheme version 2. Basically then what that means is any employees to get hold of the grant have to be furloughed by the 10th of June to be able to claim. And the reason why they've got until the 10th of June is you've got to have your 3-week continuous period by the end of June to be able to have the claim in for June. If you furlough later than that, you will not be able to claim because it then falls into the version 2 scheme, and that doesn't entitle you to claim. So you just have to watch those dates because they are only a few days away. So if you haven't furloughed somebody and you want to, then potentially you need to do it now, because if an employee hasn't previously been furloughed, you can't furlough them under the new scheme. And then you've got up to 31st of July to claim for any period up to the 30th of June. So again, you need to get your claims in. Now, the reason why some people may not have done will become apparent in a minute. So employees can be furloughed for any length of time, even down to hours, subject to the agreement. So basically what we're saying here is if you've got somebody who's part-time, they can come back and you pay them for the part-time work that they do, but then you can claim the furlough period for the amount of time that they would be off for. It does create a whole series of problems though, because we need to know what are normal hours. What about workers who are on 0 hours contracts? How do we deal with them? Because we don't know what their normal hours will be. Well, you'd be surprised to hear that the guidance isn't out until the 12th of June. And being the ultimate skeptic, I think the 12th of June has been chosen because it's 2 days after the 10th of June, which is the last date you can actually furlough people. So it's to stop people trying to play around with and gain some advantage with the furlough scheme. To be frank, we all need the guidance now. 12th of June is quite late if we were running payrolls. So it's a surprise that we've not been able to get that guidance before then. There's no new employers, as I've mentioned, and employees admitted to the new scheme post 1st of July. So it is very much a use it or lose it on the old scheme. So you need to make sure that you've got any employees and employers. Any employer who has not furloughed anybody will not have access to the new scheme. And if you have delayed putting in a claim, you need to do that now. There are a number of reasons why some companies have not put in claims. And that's basically because if you had over 100 employees, you could do it all via a spreadsheet. But if you had 70 or 80, you had to do it individually. And everyone was hoping that the government will relax the rules and enable people to send in a spreadsheet with all the details on. Doesn't look like that's actually going to happen. So if you have delayed putting in the claim because you had a lot of people on furlough, you need to go through the process now and to be able to do it. And from the 1st of July, excuse me, no claim can contain more employees than in any claim up to 30th of June 20. So for instance, if you've previously furloughed 5 people, you can't then, under the new scheme, furlough 6 or more people because you're then furloughing more people than before. It does contain some problems here because we have had a number of issues with people furloughing staff and the HMRC not being able to process the claims for whatever reason. So we can see some issues here whereby people have furloughed, it's not gone through, we're waiting for HMRC to come back to us, and that can affect the numbers going forward. So again, there are some issues with this. And under the new scheme, you need to report the hours worked and the usual hours. Again, how are we going to do it? We haven't got the guidance. Is this going to be done through the RTI? So if we operate your payroll, we need to know what normal hours and usual hours are, because you have to go back and work the hours out. We also have to look at and say that the reduction in the wage support doesn't allow employers to change their employees' terms and conditions. Employees must still receive 80% of their pay. So we'll come on to in a second the amounts, but basically it means the employee will always get 80% of their pay. So these are the other main changes to the furlough scheme. As from the 1st of August, the government will pay 80% only. The employer will pay the employer's national insurance and the auto-enrolment pension charge. HMRC have turned around and said on average that could be 5% a cost to the employer. That remains to be seen really as to what costs are involved. And then from the 1st of September, the government will pay 70%, capped at £2,187.50. And the employer pays 10% plus the employer's NI and pension. You may wonder, where have they got the 2,187.50 from? Well, it's basically the equivalent of 2,500 at 80%. 2,187.50 is the equivalent at 70%. So effectively, that is the most that they will pay out. And then from the 1st of October, the government pays 60%, which again is capped at 1,875. The same calculation applies. And the employer pays 20% plus the employer's national insurance and auto-enrolment pension costs. End of October, the scheme does cease, and that will be the end of it. We expect more guidance to be issued again by the 12th of June. We really could do with that now, to be fair. However, we don't have that, and we have to go with what we have at the moment. Moving swiftly on to the self-employed scheme, this has been extended for a further 3 months, which is interesting to note the nuances here, because the Corona retention scheme is for 8 months, whereas the self-employed scheme is actually only for 6 months. So we can actually see where the priorities of the government lie. You must claim by the 13th of July for the first SEIS grant. So that basically means the first one, which has been available to be claimed now, has to be claimed by 13th of July. After that, you can't claim for the first period of self-employment. The original claim, which is still available, is 80% of the average monthly profits, capped at 7,500 in total. Now, the applications for the second grant don't open until August. So again, self-employed people not only get 2 months less, but they're being made to wait until August before they can make the second claim. And then this claim is reduced to 70%, capped at 6,570, which is pretty close to the equivalent of the 7,500 at 80%. You can claim the second grant if you haven't claimed the first grant, which is quite the opposite from the furlough scheme. So even if you've not claimed the first one and you turn around and say, well, actually, my turnover, my business has been adversely affected more later than previously, then you can make a claim for the second grant. Again, further guidance in the self-employed scheme is going to be issued on the 12th of June. As agents, we cannot make you claim. We've looked at this, we've talked about this before, but for those who haven't been on the previous webinars, as agents, we're not allowed to make the claim because HMRC are tracing IP addresses from where the claim has come from. Where they see multiple claims from one IP address, then they will deem it as a potential fraud inquiry and it will delay your claim. We can help you through the process and we can guide you through it, but we can't actually make the claim. Just go back for one more sec. Just to bear in mind as well that when you're reporting the self-employed scheme, it is a taxable grant that you receive, as is the furlough scheme, and it is all taxable in the 2021 tax year. So it's taxed on a receipt basis. So therefore, although it covers, the first one covers March, April and May, and March being in the previous tax year, it's all treated as though it falls in the 2021 tax year. So you will need to retain all your information. Make sure you send it in to us when we do your tax return forms for next year. So we're probably looking around about this time next year. Make sure you've got all the information, you've kept all that information there so we can able to complete your return. But bear in mind, that is a taxable grant. What I'd just like to touch on as well is, which has only just come out, is HMRC Sanctions. There is a short consultation, short period of consultation on at the moment, which is in progress. So basically they're saying if you have claimed and you shouldn't have claimed and you weren't entitled to claim, then they are looking to recover the payments. Where they see there is deliberate non-compliance, i.e. it's effectively a fraudulent claim, or you really shouldn't, you knew what you were doing and you deliberately non-complied with the legislation, the penalty will be 100% by way of a tax charge. So for argument's sake, if you've claimed a £7,500 self-employed grant and you shouldn't have done, you will have to repay the grant plus another £7,500. We've mentioned that the self-employed grant is to go on to the 2021 tax return with no apportionment for the prior year. And the way the revenue are going to be looking at this is they're going to be checking on returns of the self-employed for 1920 to check eligibility for the grant. So by the time you've done your 1920 return, which is the ones that we're doing just at the moment, once those have been submitted, we will expect HMRC to start reviewing those to see whether people have been eligible for the grant. Now, the eligibility tool that's on the revenue website is not infallible. We did an eligibility check for a client and it came up that they were eligible, but we knew they weren't because they'd actually ceased self-employment in the previous year and they had no intention to trade as a self-employed person in the current tax year. So you just have to be extremely careful. What I would do, though, is to say if you followed the guidance and you have printed out that you says you're eligible, it will act in some form of defence, but you must make sure you keep all the printouts, make sure you've got all the documents to back up your claim, because you at the end of the day you're the one that's signing off that declaration to say you're entitled to it. Okay, in essence, those are all the main changes that have been made in the announcement last Friday. What I'd like to do now is, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. So if you want to unmute yourself, please feel free to do so. And I can go through the chat box. The first question I've got in the chat box is, has there been any update on whether we can claim for lost dividends? Basically, the update is that no, you can't, and they have deliberately said that no, we are not allowing it. It's too difficult to be able to work out. It's too difficult to manage. So there's not much we can do with that one, I'm afraid. as we go forward, we fully expect that taxes will go up at some later stage. And my own personal opinion is that dividends is one area that they will look to attack because it's an easy win for them. Potentially, they can increase the tax rate on dividends. Currently, it's either 7.5% or 32.5%. I fully expect that to be increased at some later date as a method of clawing back some of the tax. Just watch this space. Next question I've got is, are the sanctions relating to furlough payments or just grants? It will relate to both the furlough payments and the grants, so it is for both. Next question, if someone has been furloughed previously but is now unfurloughed as they are working on a project, can they be refurloughed in July? Yes, they can. If that person has previously been furloughed and been brought back and in July, yes, you can do that. One question about the part-time scheme as well is that it's great that it's been brought forward to the 1st of July, which was a little bit of a surprise, but it doesn't help a lot of the retail business on the basis that they're coming back in the 15th of June in a week or so's time, and there'll be a lot of part-time work there. So people are having to bring back part-time, but they will not be able to claim under the furlough for that period. My next question is, if an employee wasn't eligible for furlough on the 19th of March, can they qualify on version 2? They have to have been furloughed by the 10th of June. So that employee has to have been furloughed by the 10th of June to be eligible for the furlough version part 2, because the revenue have said that previously unfurloughed people cannot be furloughed from the 1st of July. Next question I have. Where an employee has an annual leave day and is on furlough at 80%, are we responsible to make up the 20% on the annual leave day? Yes, is the simple answer to that. But it doesn't affect your furlough claim. You just make up the 20% if that's in their contract. Yeah. Any other questions? Those are the questions that we've had so far. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and just shout out, that's fine. Please feel free. Okay. Nothing so far. Great. I've tried to keep this short and sweet because there's a lot happening at the moment with this information. As and when the guidance comes out on the 12th of June, then we will come back to you with any more details that we actually have. If you want to email me directly, my details are there on the screen. Please feel free to do so, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But basically, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning, and I wish you all a good day. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve. Very helpful. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
I didn't make much of that, did I? Dickhead. Oh, it's finished. Shit.
I don't mind putting these on.